You want to know the secrets of Macom? Why should I tell you? Just kidding. Maqam, the melodic system of Arabic music, can often seem very confusing and the knowledge can seem very exclusive, can it? The worldly hope men set their hearts upon turns ashes, or it prospers, and anon, like snow upon the desert's dusty face, lighting a little hour or two, is gone. But don't worry. In this video, I'm going to demystify Macom for you and show you the best way to learn. You probably have some other questions like, is a Macom a scale? How do I learn the microtones, the quarter tones? How does Macom relate to actual music? And how do I improvise in Macom? In this video, I'm going to answer all of those questions, but my goal here is actually a lot bigger. I'm going to transform the way that you think about music, music theory, and how to learn music. But first, I want to give a big thanks to my Patreon supporters. A bunch of people have been supporting me there, helping me build these lessons, and I'm so enormously grateful to all of you for the love and support you guys have been showing me. And for those of you out there who are here for the first time and get some value out of this, I've put the link below to Patreon. If you can afford a simple monthly contribution, please go down and do that below, because I'm going to keep building this until we have lessons covering the entire Macom system. So thank you very much to everybody, again, who's been doing that already. Okay. Here's what we're going to cover in this video. First, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to my perspective. Then we're going to listen to some songs in Macom Rust. Then we're going to analyze those songs. And then we're going to use that analysis to get a sense of the big picture of Macom. After that, I'm going to give you some tips and pointers and point you to some resources where you can continue your learning. Sound good? The worldly hope men set their hearts upon turns ashes, or it prospers, and anon, like snow upon the desert's dusty face, lighting a little hour or two, is gone. Think, in this battered caravanserai, whose portals are alternate night and day, how Sultan after Sultan, with his pomp, abode his destined hour and went his way. They say the lion and the lizard keep the courts where Jamshid gloried and drank deep. And Bahram, the great hunter, the wild ass stamps over his head, but cannot break his sleep. I sometimes think that never blows so red the rose as where some buried Caesar bled, that every hyacinth the garden wears dropped in her lap from some once lovely head. And this reviving herb whose tender green fledges the river lip on which we lean. Ah, lean upon it lightly, for who knows from what once lovely lip it springs unseen. Ah, my beloved, fill the cup that clears today of past regrets and future fears. Tomorrow, why tomorrow I may be myself with yesterday's 7,000 years. Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, that's the fourth edition of Fitzgerald's translation. So what is a Macom? A lot of people talk about musical scales when they want to approach it, but that's actually backwards. A Macom has a scale, but it isn't a scale. To begin to understand what it is, I want to start with a simple question. You like music, don't you? Have you thought about why? Think for a moment about a song or piece you really love. You like to hear it over and over again, don't you? And when you've heard it over and over again, you know exactly what's going to happen next. Now imagine a different singer covers that song, or a different musician covers that song. You're going to notice in great detail every little difference between the versions, the better you know it, obviously. The differences really stand out because you expect one thing and you get something else. Now let's expand that a little bit. I want you to think about the kind of music you like, your favorite kind of music. Let's pretend for a moment that it's your guilty pleasure, contemporary top 40 hits. When you hear a new song in the genre, a lot of what happens is really familiar. But there's always one little thing that's totally new that really draws your attention. Now, it's one thing, it's not everything new, because if everything was new, then it would not even seem like it was part of the genre. So it's that one little thing that's different. If you're familiar with chord sequences, then you might know there's a standard chord sequences for a lot of these songs, and they might throw in one new chord. The same might happen in the melody or in the beats, the rhythmic patterns. Always there's something familiar and then something new. You have expectations. Sometimes those expectations are met, and sometimes they're not. Behavioral psychologists would call this intermittent reinforcement, but this has been a principle of aesthetics for a very long time. What is it that makes something attractive and beautiful in the arts? It's a certain amount of expectation and a certain amount of surprise in the right balance. But you can't have any surprises if you don't have expectation in the first place, right? If that's the case, then what is the basis for expectation? It's familiarity with repeated patterns, isn't it? That being said, the best thing for you to do right now is pause this video and listen a few times to the songs we're about to discuss. Linked below is a playlist of songs I created in Maqam Rast. It's called Maqam Rast, Suznak Kirdan. And the first 5 of them are the ones we're going to go over. They happen to be the first 5 that are discussed in chapter 17 of the book Inside Arabic Music. So I want you to go listen to those. We're talking about Yashad al-Alhan, Hayran Alay, Al-Hubbi Kullu, Ma Takhudshi Ala Kida, and Ya Wabul Ulli. So if you take the time to do that before they're watching the rest of this video, you're going to get way more out of what I'm going to show you, because understanding Macom is about feeling expectation, not intellectually knowing it's supposed to be there. I'm going to repeat that. Understanding Macom is about feeling expectation, not just intellectually knowing that it's supposed to be there. So I know you want to learn as much as you can about this, so give yourself the time you need. It's going to really pay off for you. The more times you listen, the more you're going to build that familiarity of expectations. So hit pause now and go below, look for the playlist, and give a listen to those songs. Welcome back. Now that you're a little bit more familiar with those songs, let's start by trying to understand the simplest of them, Yashad al-Alhan. So I'm going to play it for you. Okay, so here's how it goes. Yashad al-Alhan, أسمعنا رنة العيدان يا لا اللي يا لا. Okay, did you notice that a change happened there on the words ya la ya la? So that change is the first thing that draws our attention in Arabic music. And that is the change from one jins to another. We happen to change from jins upper rust to jins nahawand. I'm going to go on. Let's see when it happens again. Ya la la, ya la la. There's another change. Ya la la, another change. Ya la la, ya la la, the change. Rannat al-aidan. And we're coming down to the bottom, the root chins. Ahi asma'na. Ya la la, ya la 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 la. Ya ya la li. Okay. So do you feel the tonic of this song yet? If you don't know what a tonic is the note that melodies resolve to. It's a common term in Western music theory, but it just means that note that we end on. In this case, it's this note. Ahi asma'na, ah ya la la li, ya la 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 la, ah ya la li. And you can often tell the tonic by singing or playing a note that's not the tonic and hearing that it's not resolved. So if I play this note, you can hear that that note wants to resolve up. So we're going to call the tonic 1. And for the rest of this lesson, I'm going to stay in this same key. So all the songs, I'm going to sing in that same key. And this is going to be our 1 for the whole lesson. So try to use your pitch memory. Now, some people like to think about a scale as do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, do. But I prefer to use numbers because it helps us understand our position. So I actually want you to repeat after me. 1, go ahead, sing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so that's the scale. And 5. Sing that note. Hold it in your memory. And hold this note in your memory. That pitch memory is going to help you as we start to break it down. So the song starts. What scale degree did it start on? Right, it started on the octave. 8, 7, 6, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is the jints that we call upper rust. Yashadil alhan asmana rannat al-aidan ya la la li 5 ya la la. So that's the first note that changes. 5, 6, 7, and you notice the 7 changes. We had 8, 7, 6, 5, 5, 6, 7. You hear how now the 7 is lower? So this jints we call jints nahawand. Ya la la, ya la la, and that's the next change. So we want to figure out where we are, right? The pitch memory is important. This is still 5, 5, 6, 7, 5, 6, 4, 6. You notice how the 6 changes? So this phrase, Ranna, 6, 5, 7, 6, 5. You can sing that. 6, 5, 7, 6, 5. This is Jints Hijaz, sitting on that 5th scale degree. We had Nahawan, Nahawan, Hijaz. And then back down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, getting to the tonic. Ahi esmana. 1, 4, 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Back to the original 7. 5, 6, 7, 8. Ah, yeah, la, la, li. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ah, yeah, la, li. Okay. So now, if you have been following this series already, you already have had an experience of these ejnas. I made a whole lesson for Jints Upper Rust, for Jints Nahawand, for Jints Hijaz, and for Jints Rust. And those are the 4 ejnas that we're going to focus on in this lesson. So if you've watched that already, great. If not, that's going to be one of your next steps after watching this video. That is going to be the way to start getting what's happening. This is where expectation starts to come in. So if you're totally new here, you're going to watch those next, but I'm going to summarize that jins definition. So each jins, and this is jins Hijaz, it has a particular feeling. Compare the feeling of that with the feeling of Nahawand. Very different feeling. So one way that they're different is the feeling, and that's often the first way you're going to encounter it. The other thing is the notes, the scale degrees. So we have 5, 6, 7 compared to 5, 6, 7. Nahawand, Hijaz, right? And then we have melodies associated with each jins. And that's actually what we were studying in the jins lessons. So Nahawand isn't just, we don't just play these notes. You say, okay, that sounds like minor. No, it has particular melodies. And you can just repeat after me for a second. Yadling, 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 yadling. And let's compare with Hijaz. It has its own melodies. Very different. That was Nahawand, and here's Hijaz. Hijaz melody. Yalin, yalin. Go ahead and repeat with me. Yalin, yalin. Yalini. Yalini. Very nice. So to summarize, the definition of jins is that it has a particular feeling. It has particular melodies associated with it, and these are melodies that musicians store in memory. And it has particular intervals. Intervals are the distance between notes. So between this 6, 7 is a very small interval. And in Hijaz, 6, 7, 6, 5 is a very large interval. So those are the three ways that you understand jins, and they're all happening all the time. And they interact with each other. Okay. So that was Nahawand and Hijaz. I'm just going to show you very quickly the other two ajnas we're dealing with are upper rust. So sing with me. Yalin, 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 yalin. 5, 6, 7, 8. 5, 6, 7, 8. You notice how in this case the 8 is the tonic, not the 5. This is why we call this jins upper rust. It leads up to the octave. 5, 6, 7, 8. Ya shadil alhan asmana. And you notice I need the melodies to help get the feeling and to get my intervals in tune. And finally, we have the base of the maqam, the root jins. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is jins rust. Ya li. Go ahead and repeat that. Ya li. Here's another one. Ya li, ya li, ya li. Ya li, ya li, ya li. Okay? So those are the ajnas. So now I'm going to quickly go through the piece a few more times, and we're going to kind of see it a few different ways. I'm repeating it over and over again so you really get these changes. I gave you more time now with each jins, but the changes as they happen are very quick in the song. So I'm going to use the words of the ajnas to sing the song now instead of the words of the song. Upper rust, upper rust, upper rust, upper rust. Nahawand, Nahawand, Hijaz, rust, 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 upper rust, 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 yalali. Okay? I'm going to do it again for you now, and I'm going to show you some visualization. I know that people often learn with visuals, and we're going to use some visuals in this video, but it's very important that you train your ears first and then let the visual learning help you. So give me 1 second here. Okay. So I'm going to show you how I represent this, okay, in the book. Okay, so here we have the beginning of the song, and I'm going to sing it for you with my fingers on the boxes. Ya shadil alhan asmana rannat al-aidan ya lalali ya lala ya lalali rannat العيدان أسمعنا يا لا لا لي يا لا 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 يا لا لي يا right يا شاد الألحان. Okay, now one more time I'm going to show you some notation. For those of you who like music notation, you can see it here. Now, we're actually in the key of A, not in the key of C. So this is rust on C, notated here with B half flat. That's that 7th scale degree. But I'm actually singing G half sharp. And when we get to the B flat, yeah la la, that's actually G natural. Okay, so you got to transpose that if you're interested in thinking about the notation. But I'm going to sing it here. Don't worry about the transposition, just follow along the melody. And for those of you who don't read music, just look at the words and see where I have the brackets above there. It says Jints upper rust 5, 8. That just means it's the Jints that stretches between 5 and 8. Ya shadil alhan asmana rannat al-aidan ya la la li, ya la la, that's the Nahawand. Ya la la li, ranna, that's the Hijaz. Rannat al-aidan, asmana. Back to rust, ya la la li. Ya la 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 ya la li. Okay, so this is the only time I'm going to show you guys music notation, not just because some people out there don't read it, but because it's actually a major distraction. The best way to understand it is using these boxes. So now we're going to go through the other songs in this chapter, but I want to give you a little summary first. Okay, so we heard 4 different ajnas. They occurred in a particular sequence, and some were more prominent than others. We had a lot more upper rust and rust, and Nahawand and Hijaz were just a taste. All of these things start to set up expectations in your ears, right? You expect a lot of one thing and you expect a little bit of another. That's how the expectation starts to build. And the more you remember, the stronger the expectation. So now I want to compare with the next songs that we're going to do. Okay. So we're going to do Hayran Ale, and I'm going to just sing the chorus for you because I want you to hear it first and think about it with your ears before we start to look at the graph. We're going to notice some of those same changes. Hayran Ale starts. That's upper rust. 8, 7, 6, 5. That's rust in the upper octave above 8, 9, 10, 9, 8. Nahawand. So now the chorus goes like this. Hayran Ali bin al-ulub. That's upper rust. 876 98765. Bin al-ulub. 8. Then upper rust. Rust in the upper octave. خليتي قلبي راح يدوب حيران. And that's where you get the Nahawand. 8 7 حيران علي. 7 8 7 6 5. So listen to that transition, because again it's the same thing we got in Yashad al-Alhan. In Yashad al-Alhan we had يشهد الألحان أسمعنا رنة العيدان يا لا للي يا لا لا. That was the transition in Nahawand. In the Hayran Alay it's like this. خليتي قلبي راح يدوب حيران علي. That's the Nahawand. Hayran. That's the Hijaz. Hayran Ali. Back to rust. 6 5 4 3 2. 5. Still an important note. Okay, so that's how it goes. We come down almost the same sequence in this case. Upper rust followed by Hijaz. Followed by Nahawand, followed by Hijaz, and then down to rust at the bottom. Now that's one sequence, and based on hearing the two songs, you might then start to have the expectation that it's always going to happen in that order. So let's actually go through the whole song, and I'm going to actually show you now the diagram, and I'm going to sing along and point to the diagram for you so that you can see how this works. Okay, so we're going to switch the view here a little bit. So this is the diagram on page 271. Now don't worry, you don't have to have the book because I'm showing it to you here. Okay, we can zoom in a little bit at a time. Okay, so I'm going to just sort of narrate and point. It starts with the instruments. Upper rust. Rust 8. Nahawand 5, rust 1. Hayran, now we're at the what's labeled 0.9, and now I'm just going to really sing for you. Hayran ali bin al-ulum. Hayran ali bin al-ulum. خليتي, that's rust and 8. خليتي قلبي راح يدوب حيران علي. حيران علي. بين القلوب حيران علي. Da, 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 da. So then we get the chorus. حيران علي بين القلوب. خليتي قلبي راح يدوب. Nahawand, Nahawand, Hijaz, rust, بين القلوب حيران علي. Then the instruments come. The lazima and upper rust. Okay. Redit Gefaki. So we came down Nahawand, then down to rust. You notice there's no Hijaz in the middle. So we had our first change. Redit Gefaki. Bimtisali. Okay, that's Hijaz. 7, 6, 5. You hear that? Repeat after me. 7, 6, 5. I'm going to go back. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 7, 8, 7, 6, 5, 6, 5, 4. And then the instruments go. Upper rust. Redit gafaki bimtisali. Instruments go. Now, we're going to spend a lot of time on Hijaz now. The previous 3 times, we just got it like a taste. Now, suddenly, we're going to be here for a while. You notice in the timestamp, if you watch the recording, it's a whole minute of Hijaz. I'm not going to give you a whole minute now. But let me just show you what happens in the rest of the song now. Okay. Mushtirhami wallat wasi Mushtirhami wallat wasi. Right? 8, 7, 8, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. You hear the flat 6. 7, 6, 7, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. Del elbi khada lil. That's upper rust. 9, 8, 7. See how the 7 is different? 6, 5. Del elbi khada lil gamal hayran ali. Notice the nahawand. Hayran ali. بين القلوب حيران لي. Then there's a different lazima. Nahawand rust. Back to the vocals. Ishmana qalbi mush zay qalbak. Da 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 da. Still Hijaz. So we go from Hijaz to Nahawand and again repeat. Ishmana qalbi mush zay qalbak. A lot of time in Hijaz. أسب هواكي من يوم ما شوفتك. أسب هواكي من يوم ما شوفتك. Still in Hijaz. مهما تقفي ولت وسي. مهما تقفي ولت وسي. ما بين يديك خاضع لأمرك حيران لي. حيران لي. بين القلوب حيران لي. Okay. So if you look at that, there's a few things you're going to start to notice. One of them is that this Nahawand is a really dramatic ending that comes at the end of the verse. ما بين يديك خاضع لأمرك. The drama is still there in upper rust. Then as soon as we get أمرك, and then we have حيران لي. That's the change. You see the mood changes, the notes change. We have 8, 7 for upper rust, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then high 8, 7, 6, 5, hayranale. And you notice that there are a couple different options for how you can go. You don't just have to go Nahawand to Hijaz. You can go, for example, Hijaz to Nahawand. You can go from Hijaz to upper rust. Suddenly we start to see that there are more possibilities here. So now let's go to another song. Now, I've been focusing for this lesson on Egypt. The Maqam system in Egypt and in Syria is very similar. There's a lot of shared repertory. And this book actually focuses on that. It's often called the golden age of Arabic music. In the mid-20th century, the music from Egypt and Syria. I'm focusing on Egypt in order to show you that in a very small area of one particular community, we have all this similarity. But I'm using the whole 20th century. So we're going to jump now to the late 20th century, early 21st century, with the great Shabi singer Hakim and his song Ma Takhudshi Alayk Kida. Okay? So here you're going to see the same melodies, the same patterns. You can just visually scan it for a moment. Notice there's only a little bit of Hijaz that comes in at the end. But there's a lot of upper rust and Nahawand. And that Nahawand has that feeling of going down. Okay? So I'm going to give you this Hakim song. Starts with the instrument. This is upper rust, rust, A. And he starts singing on that third box, upper rust. Actually, I should keep my violin here. Okay. Yam, 7, 8. Yam. يا عمي حلمك علينا ده احنا مش قدك وهواك شلنا في عينينا وبرضه مش عاجبك مين اللي قال الغرام من اللي قال الغرام جرحه ملام خصام جرحه ملام خصام على قد ما تودنا على قد ما تودينا يا حبيبي يا حبيبي هنودك ما تاخدش على كده. So before I start the song part, I want you to notice that the opening started at the top and came down to the bottom, just like Hayran Ale and Yashadil Al-Han. This pathway, what we call sayr in Arabic music, is a descending sayr. And we call this kirdan. There's a lesson that some of you have already seen called Maqam Kirdan. And it's this version that we can say Hayran Ale and Yashadil Al-Han are in Maqam Kirdan. So this starts out, his mawal, his improvisation, starts out in Kirdan. يا عمي حلمك علينا ده احنا مش قدك. Right? Nahawand down to rust. But then when he gets to the song, it starts with the ascending sayr for rust. Okay? So we're going to start to see that in two other songs, but I just want to point out that this song starts with that, but the actual song melody actually starts at the bottom. So here. ما تاخدش على كده بم 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 وتزيد بقى في القساوة لا كله لا كده تا تا تم ازعل بس بهداوة ما تاخدش على كده ترارم وتزيد بقى في القساوة لا كله لا كده ترارم ازعل بس بهداوة. Now we're going to stay in the upper rust for a while. عامل من الحبة قبة 8, 7, 6, 8, 7, 6, 5. You notice the same melody as Ya Shaddad al-Han. عامل من الحبة أبة يعني ما كناش أحبة عامل من الحبة أبة يعني ما كناش أحبة عذبني حبة حبة. Notice the 7, flat 7. This is Nahawand. حبة مش بالكيل والعداوة ما تاخدش على كده. This is the chorus. وتزيد بقى في القساوة لا كله لا كده تم ازعل بس بهداوة ازعل بس بهداوة. And then the instruments come in. Rust. Nahawanda. Nahawand. Back to rust. Nahawanda. Rust, rust, rust. Nahawand, 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 rust, 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 rust. Nahawand, Nahawand, rust. 5. Again, we're going to the 5 and we're getting something else. This is Jins Bayati. Now, this is the only time we're going to see it in this particular lesson. This is this little thing here. On 5, 6, 7, 6, 5. You can repeat after me. 5, 6, 7, 6, 5. So this is Bayati, and you notice it substitutes on the same tonic. We're going to go for the rest of the song. Down to the rust. So the song goes, ما تقول على إيه ناولنا ونريح بعضنا ولا تفضل شغلنا وتتعب قلبنا ما تقول على إيه ناول. Now it actually should all be in Bayati, but Hakim sings a little improvised phrase. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. It's a flat 8, 7, 6, 5. ما تقول على إيه ناولنا ونريح بعضنا. Rust 1. ولا هتفضل شغلنا وتتعب قلبنا. And then the instruments go to give you the Hijaz. Notice this transition. 7, 6, 5, and then 7, 6, 5. The 6s are very close. The 7s are very different. So here we go, the vocals. Da 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 da. يا فايتنا في نار وحرقة راست ده الحب ما فيهش فرقة يا فايتنا في نار وحرقة ده الحب ما فيهش فرقة. And then we get the upper rust. ولا في الشرط ونقاوة عامل من الحبة أوبا. 5, 6, 7, 8 upper rust. يعني ما كناش أحبة با عامل من الحبة أوبا. يعني ما كناش أحبة عذبني بنهواند مش بالكيل والعداوة. So again, some of your expectations are being expanded. Some of them are remaining the same. We're reinforcing that expectation of Nahawand going down to rust. Hayrana le right? You expect that. But this time we didn't get the Hijaz in the middle. We got the Hijaz there as a taste. So again, It's a little bit of Hijaz, it's a little different, and we got something also to mix with the Hijaz this time. So a little bit of variety, but a lot that is the same. All right, so this is El Hubbi Kullu on page 274 of the book. If you listen to the recording, this part is actually the first vocal part that starts about 9 minutes and 45 seconds in. 1, 4, 3, 2, 1. And again, like the song, this one starts at the bottom. الحب كله 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1. So let me start with the song. الحب كله حبيت فيك الحب كله وزماني كله أنا عشت ليك زماني كله حبيبي قل. That's the Nahawand. 8, 7, flat 7. حبيبي قل الدنيا معايا. Back to Rust. 5, 4, 3, 2. ولكل قلبي دقت حس يا حبيبي قول الدنيا معايا ولكل قلبي دقت حستا يا دنيا حبي نهوان وحبي ده العمر هو ده العمر هو الحب وبس واسقيني واملا واسقيني تاني اسقيني تاني من الحب منك من نور زماني اسقيني ياللي من يوم ما شفتك حسيت كأني اتخلقت تاني حسيت كأني اتخلقت تاني. So we noticed a lot that was the same. There's this beautiful transition in Nahwan Hijaz, a little different than the others. It's the same basic jins sequence, but you get the melodies. Del Omri Hua 4, 5, 6, 7, and then going down to the flat 6. Del Omri Hua 5, 6, 7, 8. Let me do that again. 4, 5, 6, 7, 6, 7, 6, 5, 6, 7, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. Back to the territory of Rust. Del Omri Hua Del Omri Hua El Hubbi Ubas. And you notice this Nahawan that comes in here. Is'ini tani minnak mil hub min nur zamani. So we have 8, 10, 9, 8, 7 gives us that 7, 6, 5 Nahawand. So again, some of those similar patterns. I'm going to do one more song for you, and this is one of my very favorites. And there's a lot of variety in this one, and that's one of the reasons that I want to show it to you. This is, jumping back to the 1930s, late 30s. This is Abdul Wahab's song, Ya Wabur Ulli. It's a song about a train and a journey, and the people on that journey, and who they meet on that journey, and the different feelings that it brings up on the journey. So I'm just going to go through it. Again, I'll point where I can, and I'm going to move the screen so you can see it as you can. Starting on A, starts on Nahawand 8. That's really weird. We only get it here. Nahawand on 5. Back to Rust 8. Upper Rust. Rust. the song starts in rust, just like the last two. But it starts on 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. يا وبر قول لي رايح على فين، يا وبر قول لي وسافرت منين، يا وبر. Now I gave it that Hijaz 5 because we have flat 6, 4, 5, 6 instead of 6. يا وبر قول لي 5, 6, 5. يا وبر قول لي، يا وبر قول لي. Still in rust. عمال تجري قبلي وبحري، تنزل وادي تطلع كوبري. عمال تجري قبلي وبحري. 6, 5, 8, 7, 6, 5. تنزل وادي تطلع كوبري. A variation of Hijaz. حود مرة. This week because we have flat 6, 5, sharp 4. حود مرة وبعدين دغري ما تقول يا وبور رايح على فين. 5, 6. صوتك يدوي وانت بتهوي، صوتك يدوي وانت بتهوي، والبعد أليم ناره تكوي، والأرض بساط. Notice the beautiful Nahawan change. والأرض بساط وانت back to Nahawan بتطوي، ما تقول يا وبور رايح على فين على فين. Let me just do this again. بعدين دغري ما تقول يا وبور رايح على فين، صوتك يدوي وانت بتهوي، صوتك بيدوي وانت بتهوي، والبعد أليم ناره تكوي، والأرض بساط وانت بتطوي، ما تقول يا وبور رايح على فين على فين. بام بارارارارارارام بارام. Okay, let me adjust. يا وبور قول لي رايح على فين، يا وبور قول لي وسافرت منين. 1, 2, 3. يا وبور flat 6 to give us a taste of Hijaz for just a second. يا وبور قول لي، يا وبور قول لي. And then we come down in Nahawan. Dum da da dum da da dum da da dum. Rust, rust. 5, 8. قربتي غريب نهواند وبعد. 5, 6, 7. وبعدتي قريب. It's a little variation of rust. وجمعتي حبيب على الشمل حبيب. القرب نصيب والبعد نصيب ما تقول يا وبور رايح على فين انطال الوقت 587 انطال الوقت على الركاب يجري كلامهم في سؤال وجواب بعد شوية يبقوا أحباب وده يعرف ده رايح على فين على فين على فين. Now there's another verse. I'm not going to go through it because that's how much we put in the book. But I want to make a few observations for you all we've seen here. So we want to review some of the main points and kind of draw our conclusions about Macom based on these songs. So obviously you can see that my approach is we take the music, we see what is in the music, and we let it tell us about what is Macom. So the first thing to observe is that expectations are built from repeated sequences as they go into memory. Second thing to notice is that some things are more common than others, and that starts to build an expectation for us. Another thing to notice is that there are multiple pathways, there are multiple options to go back and forth. So in the book, in chapter 17, we sort of make a couple different similar points. There's no one particular order. So you might hear people say, oh, if you're improvising in Maqam Rust, you have to go first from Rust, then up to Nahawan, then to Hijaz, then to Upper Rust. No. There's not one order. There are multiple orders, and there are different kinds of expectations built around having a choice of going one way or another. Another point, the root jints, that Rust on one, doesn't always happen at the, like it doesn't connect every time to the upper jints. The upper jints, the upper ajnas, like this is an example here, that we were just listening to in Yawabur, right? قرب نصيب والبعد نصيب ما تقول يا وبور رايح على فين انطال الوقت على الركاب يجري كلامهم. So we have all of this وسؤال وجواب نعوان بعد شوية يبقوا أحباب نهوان Hijaz, and then finally we get down to the Rust. Yeah, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So they can come in different orders. And the reason that we point this out is because traditional Maqam theory thinks about Maqam as a scale where you have a bottom half and a top half. And if you change it in any way, suddenly you are in a new Maqam. What we're trying to show with these examples is that we have never left Maqam Rust in all that we've done in this video so far. We have changed ajnas. We've jumped around ajnas in different orders, but all of these songs have all of those ajnas, and they don't all have to connect to the bottom part of the scale. It's not like we have a whole scale. That's what we pointed out here in the book. Right? It's not like we always go down to the root jints Rust to go up. That's the sort of scalar conception of Macom that's been part of Macom theory for a long time. So we're going against that. And the other thing to point out, as we point out in the book, is that just because we use Hijaz doesn't mean we're in a different Macom, Macam Suznak. Macam Suznak is a version of Rust that emphasizes Hijaz, and we have a lesson for that down below. But you saw how Hijaz was this little part of the melody that was crucial, that happened in a bunch of different ways. I want to show you a couple different things. So on page 326, you see like
we have different options for how we can go. And we heard these different options, bunch of different options. And if you take these options together, basically if you take what I showed you step by step, going in order from the charts we were looking at, you can create a graph like this. This is what we would call the descending Seir of Maqam Rust, known as Maqam Kirdan. And if you guys have been watching the lessons, you'll see this is basically the chart I drew for you. The arrows are options, the pathways are there, and that is the descending pathway of Maqam Rust. And this little pathway occurred in every single song that we had. Notice it doesn't have to go in one particular order. All of them can connect to the root jints, the bottom jints. All of them can go to each other. So that's how that works. I wanted to make another point here about what I'm calling interpolation. So interpolation is when you expect to go from one thing to another and you get something else in its place. What do you think happens when you start to hear that? And the example that we have is you might hear Nahawand going down to Rust, and then sometimes you get Hijaz in the middle. You're still expecting the first thing. Just because A was interrupted by A to B is interrupted by C doesn't mean suddenly we forget about this expectation of A going to B. We just start to build a complexity in memory. And I gave you a spoken example of using interpolation in plain English. I love to listen to Kulthum's song, Ghanni li shwaya shwaya. With an interpolation, I love to listen loudly and enthusiastically to Kulthum's song, Ghanni li shwaya shwaya. So you see the meaning of the sentence is still there. The interpolation gives us some variety. Now, I want to make a point, what we were talking about with expectation and what I referred to as intermittent reinforcement from behavioral psychology. When you start to get a repeated sequence and you start to expect it, and then sometimes it's violated, that builds in you almost wanting it more. And one of the things that we notice in Maqam Rust, just as an example, is that if we haven't heard the Hijaz yet, we wait for it and we want it to come, right? So in the example that we had of Il Hubbi Kullu, you saw exactly how that works when Kulthum sings just a taste of Hijaz, and when it gets there, it's so sweet because we've been hearing this Rust to Nahawand, but our ears, if we've heard Yashad al-Han and the other songs, we're waiting. When is the Hijaz going to come? And then it just comes for a taste. So that gives us that little bit of surprise. We don't know when it's going to come, but we know it's there. And that's how you can expect both options. You expect maybe we're going to get to Nahawand. You expect maybe we're going to get to Hijaz. And when you build all those expectations together, we end up building a graph. So this is what Maqam looks like. This graph is built on the songs we just heard. And this graph is just taking sequences. Where can it go from one to another? So think about it. What happens if you listen to a bunch of songs in this Maqam? You're going to start to build this expectation in your ears, and the expectation in your brain built on your memory is going to start to look a lot like that graph. There are going to be connections in your brain between Nahawand and Hijaz, between Upper Rust and Nahawand, right? These intermittent reinforcements, these multiple options, these pathways opening up are going to start to build a rich experience for you in your mind. And that, then what starts to happen is the more songs you listen to, let's say, as we saw in this particular Maqam, Jins Rust is super common and Jins Hijaz is less common. So your memory in your mind, the frequency in your mind starts to match the frequency of the songs. The more songs you listen to, the more that frequency starts to match. And the more that other people in the community with you start to have the same little map in their heads. That's actually how Macom is working. Everyone is having the same frequency of expectations, or a similar frequency of expectations. So I'm going to give you my definition of Macom based on that. A Macom is a finite network of familiar pathways among ajnas practiced by a particular community. Okay? A finite, that means limited. There's not an infinite variety of places you can go to. Finite network, different options of moving. Familiar pathways, you have to know them and expect them to go from one to another. Practiced within a particular community, meaning that a bunch of people, all the musicians who played with Kulthum in the 1950s, right? They all had those same expectations. All the listeners who listened to Kulthum from across the Arab world had those same expectations. In the mid-20th century, for Arabic music, it was a huge community, larger than it is now, of people who listen to Maqam music. But however big or small the community is, it's that expectation in the community. So I want to address, based on that definition, some of the main questions you may have. And then I'll tell you how to use the rest of the videos that I've created in order to continue your studies. So we started to say, is a Maqam a scale? The answer is flat out no. It is not a scale. We saw that the way that it behaves is it moves around from one part of a scale to another. We can abstract a scale, but even one scale is not enough to define it. There's a lot of different parts to it. Another question. What about the microtones and quartertones? How do you learn them? You'll notice that I didn't talk about the intonation of these different notes at all. And that's very deliberate and intentional, because the best way to learn, especially if you're unfamiliar with the music, is not to try to figure it out, not to try to think, what is this intonation? Not try to define it, but to copy and hear melodies. Because the intonation varies from region to region, and from the early 20th century to the late 20th century. These notes we call quarter tones are not exactly quarter. In Egypt, in the beginning of the 20th century, it was a little higher. At the end of the century, it was a little lower. If you go back and listen carefully to Ya Wabur, you'll notice that the third scale degree is a little higher in Ya Wabur than it is in El Hubbi Kullu. That's because there was a gradual change over the course of the 20th century. So we could make a definition of it, but it's not helpful for you as a student. It's not helpful pedagogically. It's not helpful for you to learn. What's helpful is learning that intonation through how it feels within melodies. And that's why over the course of the lesson, some of you have seen some of them already, and some of you are going to go from now to start to study the Jins lessons. It's by learning the key melodies and starting to absorb that feeling associated with each Jins that the intonation starts to lock into your memory. Because intonation, again, is something you expect. So again, everything is being built through these expectations. And we can deal with definitions at a later time. I'll give another lesson for that. So how does Maqam relate to actual music? Another question. Well, we just discussed it. The Maqam is actually the abstraction from the music. The Maqam is what we get if we distill the movements within the music and we see how is the music built on the expectations. The Maqam is the network of expectations that comes out of listening to all this music. So another question, how do you improvise in Maqam? So, to improvise, you need a couple different things. One, you need to have these expectations in your ear. You need to know what's going to happen, because improvising is not about just playing whatever you want. Improvising is about playing with expectations. It's about starting to do something familiar and then doing something different at the time you choose. When you feel like, I'm ready to surprise people, or I want to keep people comfortable. Improvisation is a play with those expectations and surprises, just like composition, just like any other art form. So first you have those expectations of movements among ajnas, but you also have a melodic vocabulary for each jins. like I showed you earlier in the lesson, each jins has this little bit of vocabulary that musicians know, and in order to do something in the style, you actually are playing those chunks of melody. You're not just going note to note to note. You're combining smaller chunks of melody that are built up. Now, we didn't go too much into that in this lesson, but that is actually the whole subject of the other lessons on this page, on this channel. Each of the jins lessons spends time where you can repeat all of the core melodies of each jins. So when you go and you study each jins, that is going to build for you that vocabulary. Now, the vocabulary has to be in your memory so you can access it quickly, and you have these pathways in your memory. But that is how improvisation arises. It's not very difficult, but you might be confused because you might hear trained, experienced Arab musicians who haven't thought about it very much, who grew up in this tradition, who'll just say, oh, you just play what you feel. What they're saying is true for them. They play what they feel because they already have those networks of expectations. They already have all that melodic vocabulary. If I asked you, how do you improvise speaking in whatever language you speak? You probably speak English if you've stuck through this video. How do you improvise in English? Well, you just say what you feel like saying, right? It's because you already know the English vocabulary. And you already know some things about the grammar, not intellectually, but your brain has that all stored in. So that's how you improvise. And the point of the lessons that I've given you is to help you have the materials you need to keep doing that. So briefly, the way that these courses are structured, and if you're coming to this now new, I recommend you go to Unit 1, which is going to be lessons 1 through 12. This is actually lesson 12. Just to get a sense of Maqam rust. Sometimes it's helpful to go to one Maqam and then expand from there. But everything else on the page is going to be divided into lessons for each jins and lessons for each Maqam. So there's about 20-some ajnas. I'm going to be making lessons, and if you're seeing this a year or two after I'm publishing this, you'll already see on the page there's a whole bunch of ajnas. You want to learn the ajnas to learn the melodies for each jins. And then the lessons that focus on a Maqam show you the pathways among ajnas for that particular Maqam. So the way I'm building the lessons as we go is I'm adding each jins one by one, and then I'm building a Maqam based on the ajnas that you should already know based on that Maqam. So, and I'm going to refer to it, so if you go to one of the Maqam lessons, you'll see at the beginning of the lesson I say, well, in this particular Maqam, we're using these ajnas, so make sure you know those, and then do the Maqam lesson. So that's the way you should study. You study the jins, the ajnas is the plural of jins, and then you study the Maqam. There's going to be a few videos also up on teaching you how to learn by ear if you're an instrumentalist, so you don't have experience with that. And a few topics in music theory like this one. Once you get those basics from Unit 1, you can, of course, jump around. If you want to study Maqam Zanjaran, you're going to say, oh, okay, I need to make sure I review Jins Ajam and Jins Hijaz. And so you can go to the Maqam and then study the ajnas that are important. So you can definitely jump around. There's no need to go in a particular order in using these lessons. Now, the most important thing, I would say, other than, I'm teaching you how to learn by ear, if you don't know already. You can follow along what I'm doing, but what is really going to help you is listening to a lot of songs. The more songs you know in your ear, the more that expectation is going to build for you. So I'm just going to quickly show you some of these resources you can use. Some of you may know them already. The first is Maqam World, the site built by Johnny Faraj. Johnny is the person who came up with the idea to write Inside Arabic Music, and he invited me to be his co-author, and I am tremendously grateful to him for that. So he built this site back in the early 2000s. It now has translations. It's fantastic. And it gives you the scalar understanding, and it gives you song samples. So if you go to jins, and let's just click on jins, and you want to click on jins, I'm going to scroll down here. you want to click on Jins. Let's go to Jins Rust. Okay. Click on Jins Rust. You're going to see a scalar sample. This is if it's in Rust on C. But the scalar sample is only one little piece of it. That can help you, but more important is what's here. All of these song examples. Okay? So these are going to give you the feeling of Jins Rust. You're going to play these song examples. I'm not going to click on them because then YouTube will flag me for playing copyrighted material. But you can do that. And then you can go to Macom. And let's go to Macom Rust just to see that. Macom, and we're going to scroll down to... They're built by Macom families. So families are Maqamat that have the same bottom Jins and different ones up top. And Rust is a very big family. We're going to go to Rust. And there you have Rust, Upper Rust, and Nahawand. This is the traditional definition of Macom Rust. And Macom World is your best resource, period, to understand the traditional definition of Macom. Working with Johnny, we built, in the book, another layer of understanding, the way I've been teaching in this lesson. But the traditional definition is still true. It's just that there's more to it. And here are examples in the Macoms. You can listen to those examples. You see some of the examples we already discussed. I have a lesson I made in Dulab Rust. We have Yashadid al-Han, everyone's first favorite example. So obviously, this site is an amazing resource. I built a site called Macom Lessons. And on that site, there's a lot of content. But I'm going to point you to the analysis site where you can see analyses by Macom. So in Macom Rust, you can see that, and I'm using Firefox, by the way. This site is a little bit outdated in terms of its functionality, but I hope to rebuild it. For those of you who want to support me, what I'm doing, your support on Patreon will help me hire someone to rebuild the site so it's a little more playable. If you are seeing this a year or two later, then hopefully that means that it's been upgraded, and thanks to the help of all the Patreon supporters who've come here. And I'm really grateful to you all for that. Either way, this is playing in Firefox. You can play it. Again, I'm not going to play because YouTube will flag me, but you see the same analysis we just did. Right, but you'll get to hear it from different singers. And you can see I have a bunch of songs, even more than we just did, and it's the same visual that you see in the book, showing you color-coded in this case, giving you that visual sense. There's a whole bunch in Rust, because I think Rust is important. Here's Hayran Ale. And there's a bunch of others. There's other resources on the site. And I want to take you to one other part of the site, which is the Rust vocabulary site. So I did some analyses of songs in Rust, not songs, improvisations. Improvisations by singers in the first few decades of the 20th century, again in Egypt, to focus on this. This is Abu Layla Muhammad, who is one of Kulthum's teachers, and again you can play it and listen to it, and I did notate it, but there's sections on this site that show you which jins it's in. You can get a sense, and again listen to this to see what's happening. And then Kulthum, you'll see, does some of the same melodies and pathways as Abu Layla Muhammad, who was, after all, her teacher. So those are key resources for you to use. And a final resource for you to think about is just YouTube itself. YouTube is a great resource. And you want to go check out Kulthum, some of the other singers. I'm not going to plug Kulthum's channel. I'm not a sponsor of it, but Kulthum has a channel on Mazika that has all of her songs, and you could just go there and browse. You don't really have to listen only to one maqam first. You want to start to listen to what attracts you and let that start to build these connections in your brain. That's how you're going to do it. And what's going to happen is you're going to start to build that expectation, and there's a relationship between the network of expectation in your brain and what you see as an average in the repertory and what's in the community. As a footnote, this happens to be something that is known in information theory, a branch of mathematics, the mathematics of communication, Claude Shannon, where they analyze the mathematical structure of spoken language and codes. And this is the property called the ergodic property. It means the statistical likelihood of certain things becomes the same over a long period of time. So in this case, it would mean that in Macom Rust, you listen overall to a whole bunch of Macom Rust, you're going to have a similar statistical expectation for the amount of Jins Hijaz you're going to get and the number of pathways between Hijaz, Rust, and Nahawand as you would by taking any large sample. And so then that property of the brain of communication codes is going to mean it's going to be put in your brain in the same level that it is in the repertory and in the community. So before you go, I want you to think about a few more questions. How do you think the process of learning affects how it is in your brain? Learning is, after all, a sequence of events, right? You learn one thing and then you learn another. One thing is an older memory than another. So how does learning affect the structure of music in your memory? How does the way you learn affect your expectations? How does it affect your emotional experience of the music? What happens if, on the other hand, you follow a set of written rules that you found? The scale is this, and you have to do this and that. And what is that going to do? And you try to memorize those rules and base the music on that. What is that going to do to your learning process? How do you think that this relates to learning to speak a new language, or how children learn to speak a new language? And then another question. Once we realize that the structure of music comes, as I described, out of content that is held by a community, that's the possession of a community, right? It's in the brains of everyone in that community. It's held by them. What is the politics of that? How does that relate to the politics of language, of what we call a high language or a low language, of when languages are dying or some languages dominate over others? There's a politics there. And finally, an important question is, how does an individual artist distinguish herself when there's so much tradition and so much content to learn? And how does that, because it happens, right? Every artist is different, even though we saw that they're using the same pathways. How does that difference relate to the same differences in spoken language artists, actors, writers, etc.? How does that work? Because we know it happens. So I'm going to leave you with a few final thoughts, just to close the circle here. I mentioned aesthetics. This is Aristotle's Poetics. Now, I'm not always a fan of the ancient Greeks, but Aristotle, in the Poetics, where he's talking about tragedy, gives us a succinct explanation for something that is similar to what we talked about here. He's talking about plots. I'm going to read a few excerpts. Plots are either simple or complex, for the actions in real life of which the plots are an imitation obviously show a similar distinction. An action which is one and continuous I call simple, when the change of fortune takes place without reversal of the situation and without recognition. That would be like one pathway. We expect a series of events to happen. A complex action is one in which the change is accompanied by a reversal, or by recognition, or by both. These last should arise from the internal structure of the plot, so that what follows should be the necessary or probable result of the preceding action. Reversal of the situation is a change by which the action veers around to its opposite, subject always to our rule of probability or necessity. He talks about Oedipus. Recognition, as the name indicates, is a change from ignorance to knowledge, producing love or hate between the persons destined by the poet, for good or bad fortune. The best form of recognition is coincident with a reversal of the situation. Now, of course, Aristotle is trying to put rules on it, but he's making very key observations. And the key point he says is two parts then of the plot. Reversal of the situation and recognition turn upon surprises. So that is the poetics. I mentioned that these things were known, have been known and thought about for very many years, for millennia. One more thing to think about for those of you who are fans of classical music. This is the only Western music theory book worth reading. This is Robert Gerdingen's Music in the Galant Style. And he takes an approach here that is very similar to the approach we take in Inside Arabic Music. He basically shows you that there are sequences, chord sequences that are known in memory, that were known by the musicians in the 18th century, by Mozart and his contemporaries, that were built up, and that songs were built up from these sequences. He's talking about the possibility of knowing these sequences and then building, and those sequences are vocabulary. He calls them schemas, but it's the vocabulary of a chord sequence, and there's particular ones that musicians know, and he gives hundreds of examples, just like we do in Inside Arabic Music. So it's a very highly recommended book for those of you who are interested in seeing the parallels between what I've been talking about and other kinds of music. I personally see what I've described for you as being a universal phenomenon of all music. Whatever genre it is, you have vocabulary in the memory, and that creates expectations. So big thank you to everyone who has watched so far. You guys are amazing. Please like and subscribe. Please share this video. Extra shout out again to the Patreon supporters. Your support over my development of these lessons so far has enabled me to put all of this together for you. I cannot express how much gratitude I have for everyone who's supporting me on Patreon. And if you want to go and support me, please go down, check out the link below. Simple monthly contribution will help keep this going. I want to thank everyone who's been reading Inside Arabic Music and suggesting it to people. It's becoming a popular book now. You don't need the book to understand this lesson or to understand the Maqam lessons, but I don't know why you wouldn't want to get the best book written about Arabic music in the 21st century. Your choice. And a big thanks to Johnny Faraj, who invited me to become a part of the project. He and I have been friends for over 2 decades. We worked together on his site, Macom World, and we've had all these conversations, and all of the ideas that I'm presenting are a result of dialogues with Johnny. So a huge thank you to Johnny. I love you, Johnny. So let's just end with some music. See if you can figure out when I'm doing Nahwan and Hijaz and Upper Rust.